Amara was the embodiment of elegance. Born into one of the wealthiest families in the city, she had everything a young woman could wish for: beauty, intelligence, and a life of privilege. Her father was a well-known businessman, and her mother, a socialite, made sure Amara was always in the spotlight of high society. From a young age, Amara was groomed to be the perfect daughter, one who would marry into an equally prestigious family, solidifying their position in society. But Amara's heart yearned for something beyond the material wealth and luxurious gatherings she was surrounded by. There was a deep longing within her for a connection that went beyond status and wealth. She would often escape to the quiet corners of the city, seeking solace away from the expectations that bound her every move. One such day, as she walked through the bustling streets of her city, she noticed a man sitting on the corner near a busy market. His clothes were ragged, his face covered in the grime of the streets, and his eyes seemed to carry a deep sorrow. Most people walked past him without a second glance, but something about him stopped Amara in her tracks. She approached him cautiously, offering him some bread and water, a simple act that had become second nature to her over the years. The man's eyes, though filled with exhaustion, seemed to light up as he accepted her gesture. His name was Kofi. There was an air of mystery about Kofi. He never begged, but always seemed to be there, lingering in the background as if he didn't want to draw attention to himself. But there was something about the way he carried himself that intrigued Amara. Unlike the other beggars she had seen, Kofi didn't ask for pity. He never spoke of his past, and yet, when they spoke, there was wisdom and warmth in his words. Amara began visiting him regularly, bringing him food and sharing conversations about life, the world, and their dreams. She found herself drawn to him, not because of the obvious differences in their lives, but because of the depth in his eyes and the kindness in his voice. With every visit, she started seeing past the tattered clothes and the worn-out shoes. What stood before her wasn't a beggar, but a man of great substance, someone who valued more than the shallow material world that had defined her upbringing. As Amara spent more time with Kofi, the bond between them grew. She began to see the world in a new light, one where appearance didn't matter as much as the person within. Her heart, once confined by the walls of wealth and status, had opened up to something more profound. But her family, living in the gilded cages of their wealth, couldn't understand this connection. Amara's father, a stern and proud man, demanded she end her visits to Kofi. Her mother, with her perfect image of what a daughter should be, was appalled. They couldn't fathom why she was spending time with someone of such low status. "Amara, this is not a proper relationship," her father insisted one evening, his voice laced with disappointment. "You are destined for much more. You cannot waste your time with someone like him. It's beneath you." But Amara, for the first time in her life, stood firm. She couldn't explain it, but she knew that Kofi was more than what met the eye. His heart, his character, his intelligence, these were the things that mattered. The material world that had defined her upbringing no longer seemed important. And so, Amara chose to follow her heart, even though her family refused to understand. They disapproved, criticized, and ultimately distanced themselves from her, but none of that mattered. She had found something far more valuable than money and status: love, genuine and untainted by the superficial world she had known. Amara's decision to continue seeing Kofi was not without consequences. As her bond with him deepened, the tension in her home grew unbearable. Her family, once proud of her every achievement, began to turn on her. They couldn't understand why she would choose a man who lived in the streets over someone from their high society, someone who could elevate her status even further. "Amara, you can't be serious," her mother would say, her voice laced with disbelief. "What would people say? He's a beggar, for heaven's sake. This is not the life you were meant to live." But Amara's heart was set. She no longer cared about the whispers behind closed doors or the disapproving glances she received at family gatherings. The more her family pushed her to end her relationship with Kofi, the more determined she became to prove that love was worth more than all the wealth and social standing in the world. Her father, a man who always placed value on material success, became more forceful in his objections. "You have everything, Amara. Why are you throwing it all away for a man who can offer you nothing but his poverty?" he demanded, his tone filled with frustration. Despite their relentless pressure, Amara remained firm in her conviction. She had come to realize that her heart was not something to be controlled by societal expectations or the suffocating pressures of her family. Kofi had shown her a world she had never seen before, one where love, humility, and integrity were the true measures of a person's worth. The tension reached its peak one evening, when Amara's father, angered by her stubbornness, gave her an ultimatum. "You either choose him, or you choose this family. You can't have both," he warned, his voice cold and final. Amara stood in the middle of the grand dining room, the echoes of her family's rejection ringing in her ears. She had always been the obedient daughter, the one who followed the path laid out for her. But now, she knew that path would only lead her further away from what truly mattered. She looked at her father, her mother, and her siblings, and realized that the family who once meant everything to her now stood as obstacles in her pursuit of happiness. With a steady breath, she made her choice. She refused to let love be determined by the wealth in someone's pockets or the name attached to their family. Kofi was the man she loved, the man who made her feel seen and understood in a way her family never could. And with that, she knew that her future lay with him, no matter the cost. "I choose Kofi," Amara said softly, her voice steady but firm. Her words hung in the air, and with them, the final barrier between her and her family shattered. Her decision was met with silence, then anger. Her father's face turned pale with fury, and her mother's eyes filled with disbelief. They couldn't fathom that their precious daughter would choose a beggar over everything they had given her. That night, Amara packed her things and left the house she had called home for all her life. The decision wasn't easy. It tore her apart to walk away from the life she had known, to break ties with the people who had shaped her. But it was the only path she could take if she wanted to live authentically. The family's rejection was swift and harsh. They disowned her completely, cutting off all financial support and shunning her from family gatherings. Invitations to events were withdrawn, and Amara was erased from the family's social circles. She was no longer welcome in the grand estates, the luxurious parties, or the family vacations. But Amara, for the first time, felt free. Her heart was unburdened, her spirit unchained. She was no longer living for anyone else's approval. And as she walked away from everything she once thought she needed, she stepped into a new life, one where love and authenticity would guide her, not the approval of her wealthy family. In the end, Amara realized that the true measure of a person's worth wasn't found in money or status, but in the love they gave and received. And she had found that love in Kofi. Amara's wedding to Kofi was unlike anything her family had ever imagined for her. Gone were the extravagant venues, the over-the-top decorations, and the long guest lists of wealthy acquaintances. Instead, they had a quiet, humble ceremony in a small church. It wasn't filled with the pomp and circumstance that her family had expected, but for Amara, it was perfect. Surrounded by only a few close friends and people who genuinely cared about them, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The love between her and Kofi was enough. It was all she needed. They settled into a modest home on the outskirts of the city, small, simple, but filled with warmth and love. Amara couldn't have asked for a better life. Every day, she woke up beside Kofi, who was always ready with a smile, a kind word, and an unwavering support that made her feel secure. There were no grand meals or designer furniture, but Amara soon realized that she didn't miss any of it. The simplicity of their life brought her a kind of contentment she had never experienced before. As the days went by, Amara found herself falling deeper in love with Kofi, not just for the way he made her feel, but for the person he was. Kofi was more than just a beggar-turned-husband. He was kind, intelligent, and hardworking, always doing something productive, whether it was fixing a broken pipe or tending to their small garden. Despite the struggles they faced, Kofi never seemed stressed or worried. He had a quiet confidence that Amara admired. But there was more to Kofi than met the eye. As they settled into their routine, Amara began to notice subtle things about him that piqued her curiosity. He would often bring up business ideas in their conversations, discussing markets, investments, and even trends in the global economy with an ease that amazed her. It was clear that Kofi had an exceptional understanding of the world, especially in areas she knew nothing about. "How do you know so much about this stuff?" Amara asked him one evening, as he spoke passionately about a business idea he was considering. Kofi smiled, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mystery. "It's just something I've learned along the way." The world doesn't always show you what it has to offer unless you're looking closely. At first, Amara thought little of it. Maybe Kofi had read a lot or had some sort of hidden background. But as time passed, his knowledge became more and more profound. He'd speak of investments and strategies as if he were already a successful businessman, and yet he continued to live modestly, working odd jobs and making small contributions to their home. There was a quiet strength about him that seemed to set him apart from everyone else she had known, especially the wealthy men her family had always wanted her to marry. Despite their modest lifestyle, Kofi had an air of mystery around him that only deepened as time went on. Every so often, he would receive a call or a letter that he would handle discreetly, but when asked about it, he would always give a vague answer. Amara never pushed him, respecting his privacy, but she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to Kofi than the simple man she had fallen in love with. Kofi never seemed to be struggling in the way most people would if they were living with limited means. It was as if he was always one step ahead, navigating life with a calm confidence that left Amara in awe. Yet, despite his abilities and knowledge, he never seemed to want the riches or the recognition that most people craved. He was content living quietly, doing good, and helping those around him. Their life together, though far from the luxurious life Amara's family had envisioned for her, was filled with a deep, quiet joy. And though she often found herself marveling at Kofi's mysterious knowledge and effortless confidence, it was his love and presence that mattered the most to her. In his arms, she felt safe, more safe than she had ever felt before. As the days went on, Amara began to realize that Kofi was a man of depth and complexity, someone who didn't need to flaunt his wealth or intelligence because his true value was found in the way he treated others and the quiet wisdom he carried. Still, there was something in his demeanor that hinted at an untapped potential, something big and significant, yet he kept it hidden, almost as though he preferred to live beneath the radar of society's expectations. Amara often wondered if Kofi's true potential would ever fully reveal itself, but for now, she was content in the life they had built together, one that was quiet, humble, and filled with love. It was a regular afternoon when Amara's world turned upside down. Kofi had been unusually quiet that morning, his mind seemingly elsewhere as he worked on a small project in their garden. He had always been a man of few words, content with silence and the simple rhythm of their life together. But today, something was different. He seemed distracted, and Amara couldn't help but notice his unusual seriousness. Then, as she was preparing lunch, the phone rang, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. Kofi glanced at it and answered it quickly, his expression shifting into one of quiet intensity. Amara continued with her cooking, the sound of Kofi's low voice in the background barely registering in her mind. Minutes later, Kofi hung up the phone, his face pale. He stood there for a moment, as if weighing something heavy in his thoughts, before he turned to face Amara. Amara, he began softly, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of emotion. There's something I need to tell you. Amara felt a sudden jolt in her chest. She had seen Kofi in many moods, calm, joyful, even contemplative, but never like this. Something was different. Kofi, what's wrong? She asked, her concern growing. He took a deep breath and met her eyes, his usual calm demeanor faltering. I've just received a call from an international law firm. They've informed me that my father has passed away. Amara blinked in confusion. I'm sorry, your father? She asked, unsure of the connection. She knew little about Kofi's past, and that had never seemed important to her. He had told her little of his family, only that he had grown up in a modest home and that he had chosen to leave everything behind. Kofi nodded slowly, a sad smile playing on his lips. I don't speak about him much. Or about my family. But, my family is not like what you think, Amara. Amara stood frozen, her mind racing. She couldn't understand. What was he saying? Kofi, the humble, down-to-earth man she had married, had a family? But then, as if reading her confusion, Kofi continued. My father was one of the wealthiest men in the world, he said quietly. And I'm the heir to a massive fortune, beyond what you could ever imagine. Amara's heart skipped a beat. The news hit her like a tidal wave. Kofi, the man she had known as a humble beggar on the streets, was the heir to a fortune that could change their lives forever. It didn't make sense. She had always known Kofi as a man who despised the greed and excesses of the elite. He had never once shown an interest in wealth, and yet here he was, the heir to an unimaginable fortune. "But, why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "All this time, you've been living this way, so humble, so simple. Why? Why keep this from me?" Kofi sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I never wanted wealth to define me, Amara. I've seen too much of the cruelty and greed that comes with it. I left my family's world because I didn't want to become like them, selfish, arrogant, blind to the needs of others. I didn't want you to be with me because of my money. I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I have." Amara stood still, processing his words. The man she had married, the man she had loved for his simplicity, was not just a beggar, he was the heir to an empire. She couldn't comprehend the weight of the truth. Kofi had chosen a life of humility, rejecting the luxury and power his birthright offered, because he didn't want it to define him. But as the shock began to wear off, a deep sense of admiration for Kofi's integrity and humility washed over her. He hadn't used his position of privilege to manipulate or take advantage of anyone. Instead, he had chosen to live a life free from the trappings of wealth, seeking to build a life based on love, kindness, and authenticity. The revelation was overwhelming, and Amara felt as if she were living in a world that was suddenly upside down. Kofi had been hiding his true identity, not because he was ashamed of it, but because he feared that the world and she would see him differently. Meanwhile, the news spread like wildfire. As word got out about Kofi's true identity, his family, long estranged, attempted to make contact, urging him to return to them and take his rightful place in their world of wealth and power. But Kofi remained unmoved. He had left that world for a reason, and he wasn't about to return to it now. Amara's family, too, became aware of the news. At first, they couldn't believe it. The man they had disowned their daughter for was not just any beggar, he was the heir to a fortune that dwarfed anything they had. The realization hit them hard, and soon they reached out, sending messages, calling her, begging for her forgiveness. They saw now, all too clearly, the mistake they had made in rejecting her choice of Kofi. But for Amara, this was not just about money. It was about the man she had chosen to be with, the man whose character had won her heart long before the revelation of his wealth. Kofi had never been defined by his riches, and that was the man Amara had fallen in love with. Despite the newfound wealth and recognition, Kofi remained true to his principles. He continued to live simply, refusing to let the fortune that now awaited him change who he was. The love he had for Amara remained his greatest treasure, and in that, he found the peace and fulfillment that money could never provide. Amara's family, realizing their mistake, reached out to her with heartfelt apologies, begging for her forgiveness. They offered to restore their relationship and even promised a lavish lifestyle, filled with luxury and privilege, if she would return to them. But Amara, though conflicted, knew that the life she had built with Kofi, based on love, simplicity, and humility, was the one she truly wanted. She loved Kofi for who he was, not for his wealth, and she couldn't be swayed by the material promises her family offered. Kofi, despite now inheriting a vast fortune, remained steadfast in his decision to live simply. He refused to let money define their lives, continuing to focus on what mattered most: love, integrity, and making a difference. Together, Amara and Kofi decided to use their newfound wealth to give back to their community, helping those in need and staying true to the values that had always guided them. In the end, Amara's family began to see the depth of their love and Kofi's true character, understanding that happiness and fulfillment came from living authentically, not from wealth or status. Amara and Kofi continue to build their life together, grounded in the values of love, simplicity, and kindness. They focus on helping others, using their wealth to support and uplift their community, without being driven by materialism or status. Over time, Amara's family begins to understand the true depth of their love and Kofi's character, realizing that happiness doesn't come from wealth or social standing but from living with integrity and purpose. The story concludes with Amara and Kofi looking forward to a bright future together, one not defined by money, but by the love they share and the choices they've made to live authentically and help others.